That was Nelson Riddle and his orchestra with the theme to the classic TV series Route 66, starring George Maharis and Martin Milner. However, originally, actor Robert Morris was chosen to star opposite Maharis, but fate, tragically, intervened. The story of Robert Morris and the career that was cut short just as it was about to take off is the subject of a new book called Promise Unfulfilled: The Brief Life and Bizarre Death of Actor Robert Morris. Its author, Vernon Gravely, is on the program today. Vernon, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's good to have you. You know, it's not uncommon for actors with long careers to be the subject of biographies, but here we have an actor with a very, very short career and one that ended under mysterious circumstances. So what inspired you to investigate this Hollywood mystery?
Well, it all started back around the middle of May of 2018. I was surfing through YouTube looking for stuff to watch and stumbled across some episodes of Naked City, the half-hour episodes. I'd never seen any of the half-hour. I'd seen plenty of the hour-long ones, but none of the half-hour ones from the first season. And I happened to stumble across one and noticed George Maharis was in it, and I was a fan of his. When I first saw Route 66 about 1985, I was born in '65, so I was about 20 when I saw my first episode of Route 66 and became a big fan of the show. I thought, well, I'll go ahead and watch this thing with George Maharis, and it happened to be an episode called Four Sweet Corners, and it was about two Army vets, guys who like just getting out of the service were just about to, and they go back to the New York neighborhood of Johnny Gary. That was Maharis's character. And he brings along his buddy, a guy named Link, and Robert Morris played Link. And I thought, that guy looks kind of familiar, but I couldn't quite place it. So, of course, I did what web searches I could, IMDb and whatnot, and I found out he died in 1960, which was just about a year and a half after they would have done that episode of Naked City, and came across a blurb that said that episode of Naked City was actually a backdoor pilot for Route 66. That Burt Leonard, who did Naked City, wanted to do a series about a couple of guys kind of traveling across America, kind of a Kerouac type thing.
Right, exactly.
And he got Sterling Sullivan to write a pilot, and the little blurb on IMDb said that the part was supposed to be Robert Morris's for the series, but he died, so Martin Milner got it. But, you know, the pilot of Route 66 had been filmed in February 1960. Morris didn't die until May of that year. So I thought, well, that's not right. So I thought, well, Burt Leonard's dead, Sterling Sullivan's dead, but I thought, George Maharis is still alive. He might know something.
Right.
So I wrote him a letter, and he actually called me, and we talked for about 20 minutes. And I told him that I was working on an article about Robert Morris, but to be honest, at that point in time, I didn't know if I'd be able to get enough stuff together. But after I finished talking to him, I made up my mind I was going to find out what I could, and I was able to. I knew that Robert Morris was from Reading, Pennsylvania. I knew his real name was actually Robert Morozinski, and I started to do some research. I was able to track down his yearbooks and compile a contact list and started writing letters, and it went from there.
Now, Robert Morris started out as a bodybuilder and then transitioned into acting, right?
Yeah, he was very, very athletic. In fact, he played football at Reading High School. And in the fall of 1951, when he was a senior, he was on the football team there, the Red Knights. And the big star athlete that year was Lenny Moore, who went on to play with the Baltimore Colts for 11 years and is in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. But Robert Morris was probably the second best player on that team. But Morris was also a bodybuilder. He was a competitive bodybuilder, and he even competed in the Junior Mr. America competition in 1954. Which was won by a guy named Harry Johnson, who just died a few years ago. He lived to be 96, and he became Mr. America in 1959. At that point, he was the oldest guy to win Mr. America. Mickey Hargitay placed third in that competition. Of course, he went on to be Mr. Universe and Mary Jane Mansfield and all that. And a guy named Yasuko Zuhara, who also lived to be up into his 90s, placed second, and he placed first in Mr. Pennsylvania, and Morris had placed second in that competition. So yeah, he did a lot of competitions and won a lot of trophies, and he ended up getting into acting. He was actually there was a restaurant in Reading called the Crystal Restaurant, and he knew some of the owners, or one of the owners there. Was a family restaurant, and the guy that he knew apparently had some ties to the Green Hills Theater, which was a summer stock theater, and he suggested that Morris go over there and try out for a part. I think they kind of needed a kind of a hunky-looking guy for something, and so he went over there and got hooked on acting.
And in your book, you show how he won scholarships and he was doing plays all over the tri-state area, and then eventually he gets his break in Hollywood. Well, actually, before that, he's in New York and he's doing live television, because Studio One would have been live TV, right?
Yeah, the very first thing he did, and he actually did that at the time that he was doing the plays at the Phoenix Theater, because that was in March of '57. Yeah, and he has no lines. But he's at the very end. I don't want to give too much of the plot away, but Steve McQueen is the young hood who's been charged with murder, and they kind of pull his defense attorneys, one of whom is played by William Shatner, the other is Ralph Bellamy, do a kind of a switcheroo and bring in someone who kind of looks like Steve McQueen to confuse people. That happens to be Robert Morris. So he does have some very good close-ups and all that at the end, and I do have a picture in the book, in fact, of him from that show with Steve McQueen and Ralph Bellamy, and that was his first credit there. And then he did. I realized that I'm going to have to do a revised edition of this book eventually, because I ended up learning some more about the TV show Tallahassee 7000. There's not a lot of information out there in that show, but I thought he had done that next. It turned out that was not the case. It looks like the next stuff he did would have been either the Deadline stuff, which was a syndicated show, and a lot of times they filmed those episodes maybe a year or two before they'd even air.
Right.
And then he did the Naked City stuff in the 58 to 59 season. He did two of those. He did one called Hey Teach, which aired in, I think it was February of 59, and then he did the Four Sweet Corners with George Maharis, and that aired in April of 59.
You mentioned Steve McQueen. He would re-team with Steve McQueen because he appeared in an episode of Wanted Dead or Alive.
You betcha. And in fact, in that, if you watch that episode, he and McQueen don't share any screen time. And Reggie Shipe, who is Bobby's best friend, it's really interesting because all the people I talked to who knew him in Reading called him Bobby. Everybody in New York called him Bob. You know, it's like a whole different personality thing. But he went out there, and Reggie told me that McQueen didn't want to be upstaged, so he had him rework the script to where they weren't on screen at the same time together.
I see. Well, you know.
And with all I've read about McQueen, I could believe that, you know?
Right. So, so he's playing heavies, and I can understand why, because he's a big guy. And
actually, I need to interject on that, and I'll tell you why. Because he met his wife in, I think, 1957. I think it was shortly after, around the time that, shortly after he did the plays at the Phoenix Theater. And her name was Janice Kaplan. And her dad actually was Jaime Kaplan. And he was a fight manager. And he ended up dying, like, when he was 48 or 49 from a heart attack. His wife died of cancer in her 40s. They had a son who died at the age of 24 of cancer. So there were two left, two girls, Barbara and then Janice. And Janice was the youngest. And she really ended up getting into kind of alternative diets, became a vegetarian, got into frequent fasting because she was just terrified of getting cancer. And Bob Morris ended up getting onto this diet too. He had been pretty husky, but he was represented by the William Morris Agency. And apparently one of the agents suggested that if he were to lose some muscle mass, he could get him more parts if he weren't so physically, built.
Right.
And it looked more average. And so apparently that kind of opened the door for him to start going along with Janice's diet, and he did. And ultimately that seems to be, from the research I was able to do, what really sadly ended up being a contributing factor to his early death. When Reggie got out there to see him, Reggie had been in the Army, and they used to lift weights together. That's how they met. Bobby used to work at the YMCA there in Reading, and that's how they met when they were in high school, because they did not go to the same high schools. And he said when he saw Bobby, he just couldn't believe it, how thin he'd gotten, I mean, he said he figured he probably weighed about 130 pounds.
Well, of course, this kind of thing still goes on today, these fad diets, and even more so back then. I think of Mario Lanza, who went on this, big diet.
Well, yeah, and of course he was kind of forced to do that because of these filmers. They're trying to turn him into a teen idol. He's one of those guys, if they'd let him just eat what he wanted, he probably would have been like Pavarotti and had actually had a long career, But yeah, that is true in that case with him. But he did get into that. But what really made his case, what kind of pushed it into the danger zone, was the fact that he had problems with epilepsy. Well, he was epileptic, and he had started having headaches back in high school, and everyone figures it's probably from playing football, the football injuries, which of course, nowadays, with all the studying they've done, is very, very likely. Also, he had gotten in a fight with somebody, and that fight, I actually have 2 eyewitness accounts from it. One is Reggie, and one is his friend Nino Cambria. And Bobby got the crap beat out of him. And Nino said that the guy actually threw him down on the pavement, and Bobby hit his head really hard. Now, Reggie didn't remember that, but Reggie remembered that the guy hit him so hard, he knocked out one of his front teeth. So he was having these epileptic seizures, and, Reggie told me that when he was out there in California, he said he wasn't even taking his seizure medication. Because there a lot of rumors went around as to how he died, and one was that he died of a drug overdose, and Reggie said that's not the case. He said he wasn't doing any drugs. He wasn't even taking his seizure medication at that time. Of course, part of the problem there is they were on strike. There was an actor strike going on, a writer strike and an actor strike going on at that time. So he wasn't making that much money. Then one day, a Saturday in May of 1960, Reggie said that Janice came and woke him up and said that Bobby had had a bad seizure. And they wanted him to take Bobby down to this health ranch, where, of course, they would do the vegetarian diets. You go there, it's kind of like a retreat. So he did. He took him down there, and he said he'd recovered pretty well by the time they got down there. He said he was cracking jokes and all that, and so he checked in. Reggie went back home, and the next day they got a phone call saying, "Oh, something's wrong. You got to come down here." So they drive down there. They get down there, and said there's a hearse out in the parking lot.
Oh my goodness!
And there you go. And apparently they had left him in a room alone with some watermelon. He'd had a seizure while he was eating, and he ended up choking to death. Death certificate says he choked on his own vomit, but either way, they were supposed to be checking on him regularly, and they didn't. And they didn't want to be held liable, so they talked Janice into saying that she'd been there with him, so that way if they had somebody in the room with them, then they can't be held liable, so she agreed to do it, and they paid to have him cremated and buried.
Wow. I'll tell you, it's a heck of a story, and you managed to uncover it. And one last interesting piece of trivia here. When George Maharis eventually left the TV series Route 66, his character Buzz was replaced by a new character. Now, I don't know if this was done in tribute to Robert Morris, but the new character was named Link.
Right, exactly. It went from Link Ridgway to Link Case.
Right, Glenn Corbett.
Glenn Corbett came in. And, and it was definitely a throwback because he was an ex-serviceman. He was fresh off, a tour of Vietnam, And so, yeah, it does make you wonder, could he have ended up being back in that show if he were still alive. And I don't know if that would have been the case because, Martin Milner was kind of your fair-haired guy, and I think, they wanted to have probably like that kind of physical
right contrast,
difference.
Sure.
But I think there's a good chance he would have guest starred in that show, at the very least. And who knows what else, because, Leonard, they end up developing other shows and stuff, so he could end up in something. I think he was a guy who was just kind of waiting for that breakout role.
Right.
And he died before it happened.
Yeah, like I said, it's a heck of a story. The book is called Promise Unfulfilled, The Brief Life and Bizarre Death of Actor Robert Morris, by our guest today, Vernon Gravely. And where, if someone listening to this is interested in reading the book, where could they get it?
Well, it's on Amazon. That's the only place that I put it up. I was flat broke when I did it. Like many others, I'm one of the guys who lost his job during the pandemic.
Yeah.
But it gave me this chance to write this book, and I put it up there. And so just go to Amazon, and you can get the paperback, or it's also an ebook. It's priced to sell, because I figure it's a book about an obscure actor by an obscure author. So it's only $9.95 for the paperback and $1.99 for the Kindle ebook.
Well, it's been a fascinating discussion. Thanks so much for appearing on the show.
Thanks a lot for having me.
There are 8 million stories in the naked city. This has been one of them.